Man is unlike any other creature that walks the face of this earth. He has been endowed with the ability of consciousness. He gazes at the stars, wonders at the heavens, and muses over his fate. He stares into a body of water, marvels at his reflection, and wanders into the depths of his soul. Projecting into the deep, he plunges into the pool of his own psyche. As far as we can tell, he is the only creature that craves a sense of meaning, in need of some purpose to validate his existence. And when this purpose falters, so too does his ambition and will to act. Man is therefore a deeply symbolic being. For what other purpose can his love of art serve than to affirm the primacy of the subjective and symbolic? Within the paradigm of the subjective sense of meaning, are we able to describe deeply moving experiences as something meaningful? Emotive dreams, belief in myths, works of art, the act of falling in love do not convey abstract, objective meaning, but instead a living meaning that, once tied to our unique sense of subjectivity, become laden with effect, managing to relate us organically to life as a whole. Yet for all his proclivities towards the symbolic, one can't help but to notice that man is moving further away from the source of the spirit and closer towards a mechanized world, devoid of emotion and passion. For all his technological achievements, the inner world of man has not eased but hollowed. Depression rates are increasing. More and more we find ourselves unhappy with a world purportedly full of abundance. What could be more symbolic of our inner decline than by simply observing the destruction of the natural world, the outer malady manifesting as a projected mirror into our own spiritual malaise? A man in good health and spirits tends to the affairs of his garden, whereas the garden of a man dispossessed of either will likely be neglected. As we gaze upon the dawn of a new era, as we seek to ascend our planetary system and explore the astral plane, as we witness the emergence of AI, of the merging of man and machine, we ask ourselves the intrinsic questions once more of what has constituted the soul of man. What is it that fires our hearts towards satiating an endless curiosity? What great feat am I to contribute to world life, and of what value is my life? We are living in what Edward Edinger calls the age of the reductive fallacy, whereby the symbolic life is reduced to that of mere signs, functioning outside of consciousness, leaving us without a keen sense of perception, and thus unable to utilize the benefits of recognizing the value and subjectivity of the symbolic. In this age, the direction of societal engineering has led us to place a high level of value on objectivity and even on objective forms of meaning. Appreciating the fruits of mechanical engineering, we have become enamored by the melody produced from the symphony of industry and technology, whilst forgetting the wider harmony underlying the subjective sense of conscious symbolism. Objective forms of meaning differ from the subjective in that they refer to abstract, objective knowledge conveyed by a sign, essentially a token of meaning standing for a known entity, such as the colours of a traffic stop sign, each representing a known meaning, or the tool of language, with certain agreed upon sounds representing a known entity. If I were to say the word horse, you would know which animal I speak of. A sign therefore communicates abstract, objective knowledge, whereas a symbol, being an image or representation pointing to the unknown, leaves open the door of mystery, thereby allowing the human being to determine his own sense of meaning and value from the symbol, allowing a degree of organic transference to occur between the psyche and the symbol. Symbols therefore convey a living, subjective meaning that manages to affirm and relate us organically to life as a whole. In a way, it can be said that a sign is dead, but a symbol is alive. Being the repository of collective memory and behaviour, culture provides us with the framework necessary to act and make sense of our place in society. In his The Birth and Death of Meaning, Ernest Becker writes that the task of culture should be to provide the individual with the conviction that he is an object of primary value in a world of meaningful action. Yet the pressures of modern life lead the individual to seek life-affirming meaning where it does not exist, in externals and objectivity. For such individuals, the very sense of worth may be derived from their societal status, career prestige, material worth, or any external apparatus designed to harvest the attention, potential, and productivity of the individual, such as the state, politics, or society. Reverence for the subjective and symbolic have fallen. Existential and periodic life crises, where one's conviction in their life role is shaken, would have been seen by traditional religions as the individual reaching a natural stage in the life cycle, whereby the individual, with the old order no longer resonating with them, was in need of great inner change. With the help of a ritual elder, the initiate would navigate their inner psyche in a process mimicking the snake's shedding of its old skin, to let go of what no longer serves them, in order to make way for the improved version of themselves to manifest. Yet since the decline of religion, one struggles to find the adequate collective sanctuaries, the alembic vessels necessary for transformation to occur. The lack of an adequate sanctuary to replenish the soul is indicative of the lack of viable institutions through which a suitable structure can be appropriated to navigate through periodic moments of difficulty regarding the inner dimension of man. Collective religion once served the function of relating the individual to the deity, of, as we shall see later, having the ego related to the archetypal self. Think of the icons of Orthodox Christianity, where a cosmic imagery of the visual language of Christianity is manifested as a conduit to receiving divine sustenance. The vision quests of shamanism, the chanting of mantras in Buddhism, or the whirling of the Sufi dervish, designed to instill a stream of religious ecstasy within the participant as their individuality melts and unifies into the unitary stream of the divine, leaving them able to experience divinity directly in an act of gnosis, brought about by the fluidity of movement. The dance of life, mimicking the stream of individuality merging into the great sea of the unitary reality of consciousness underpinning all forms of life. With the dissolution of the ego and union with divinity, the participant is enjoined in a cathartic pool of mana that serves to heal, guide, and endow them with the creative energy needed to move through life. Post-Reformation and post-Enlightenment ideals have arguably left us with hollowed-out shells of systems and structures that have left many unable to relate symbolically to ritual and thus experience the dynamism that the subjective element of religion is supposed to provide. In place of being subjective, living, organic entities, where symbolism is free to transmit life energy to the ego, and thus support, guide, and motivate the individual to fulfill their life's mission, much of what remains of modern religious institutions serve to upkeep an objective ceremonial status quo. The dynamism of subjectivity allowed the practitioner of a great religious or philosophical tradition to creatively explore symbolism in a constructive way that bettered their inner condition and existence. The focus was not on whether a mythical event transpired literally in the same place of space and time that we occupy, but rather on what the symbol of said event came to represent for the individual personally and the community collectively. In this light, the resurrection of Christ came to be understood by the Gnostics to not be a literal raising of the earthly body, but as the symbolic raising of the divine light within, freed from bodily bonds. Christ served as the paradigm of the individuated ego, the supreme archetype of initiation into a higher form of consciousness. To the Gnostics and esoterics of old, Christ was the great teacher sent down as the vehicle through which consciousness could wake man from his slumber and empower him to realize his inner divinity. Christ served as a symbol to be emulated, showing the model by which each could tread the path to realize the divine within. He was not seen simply as the incarnation of a deity to be merely blindly followed. Much of this subjective symbolism has been eroded and replaced by static dogma, advocating for a position of objectivity, i.e., where Christ is not a dynamic symbol kept alive in the breath of the conscious organism, but rather a sign pointing towards objective truth and a singular vision of an objective reality that can be easily manipulated by whichever governing institutions seek to control the internal world of the individual, staking a claim to their very consciousness. Suffering over a millennium of being driven underground, coupled with the wider erosion of religious institutions that retain the whispers of transcendent possibility, have we truly been left, in the words of T.S. Eliot, with no more than a heap of broken images to navigate these uncertainties of life? Robert Moore outlines in his The Archetype of Initiation that there is in fact a process by which we can traverse through these uncertainties of life. The main supposition leads from a proposition that life is essentially passed by moments of transitions, an idea highlighted in Daniel Levinson's book, The Seasons of a Man's Life. These transitional periods can arise naturally and periodically throughout our lives, say the transition from boyhood to manhood, into the adult work life, into midlife, old age, or through unexpected trauma, say the death of a loved one. When we reach these transition periods, often our world order may begin to break down. Our work may cease to feel purposeful, our relationships may cease to resonate with us, our sense of meaning may begin to wither. For many, one's very sense of place in the world may become frustrated. What was once known amongst the ancients to be a natural occurrence has, through the prism of a post-industrial, material-obsessed culture, almost been lost to the sands of time. Individuals en masse are given antidepressants and benzodiazepines to manage stress and anxiety. Rather than confronting the root of the psychological crisis being experienced, society is instead sedated, cast into a state of numbing limbo. Instead, what must occur is a guided initiation into the next phase of one's life. The archetypal self is trying to communicate to the ego that the time has come for transformation. This idea of transformation or initiation refers to something that is part and parcel of the universal spiritual journey of man, the pilgrimage of human life. Initiation is the process of dying and being reborn, an idea that in order to advance into the next cycle of spiritual and mental well-being, where our world order makes sense once more, a metamorphosis of sorts must occur. We have come to imagine that space and time is homogeneous, that all that happens in the trajectory of our lives takes place at a precise moment in time, believing time itself to be linear and space itself singular. The ancient Greeks, however, believed that time was bifurcated into two, that there was a linear time within which we are able to locate ourselves for the most part, a time that is measurable, quantifiable, the clock time, referred to as Chronos. But they believed that beyond the veil of sight lay another time, a time in which we can be connected to the very rhythms and voltages of creation, a time which felt weighty but simultaneously weightless, where in the clock time of Chronos, supposed contradictions would stand in opposite to each other. Here in the time of Kairos, the significant time, a union of opposites would stand firm. It was here in the time of Kairos that time itself seemed to slow down, where the significant transfigurations of our lives occurred, and great change was possible. Mircea Eliade illuminates for us the concept of the heterogeneity of space and time. His supposition is that pre-modern cultures and societies believed and operated in cyclical time. The first mode of space and time can be labelled as profane space. Profane space is the ordinary space where we are for the majority of our time. It is the time which is ordered, structured, where our world makes sense to us. In profane space, for the most part, we are largely functional members of society. We know our purpose and have a clear sense of our trajectory. We know the path we tread on. To pre-modern cultures, however, profane space and time was always deteriorating. A link into some revitalizing source was needed for the cosmos to be regenerated. This source was accessed through what Eliade has dubbed the sacred space, the liminal space, or for Victor Turner, anti-structure. It's noteworthy to point out that for Eliade, sacred does not equal God. Moore elaborates. The consistent factor in pre-modern times was not belief in God, but belief in some kind of regenerative power or libidinal energy that could be tapped into for personal and social regeneration. This journey into the sacred space, into the Parmenidean primordial time, was undertaken periodically by ancient societies. At auspicious times in the year, midway between the equinox and solstice, the Celts, for instance, partook in the Samhain and Beltane festivals. Seasonal cycles where the gods, spirits of ancestors, were invoked to rejuvenate the cosmos. It was through the reactualization of a sacred event, taking place in a mythical past, that the participant could be drawn into sacred time, the same time that was manifest and present the previous year, or the previous centuries. According to Eliade, it is the time that was created and sanctified by the gods at the period of their gesta. It is exactly a periodic tethering to the sacred time that establishes the idea of an eternal present, to the primordial time, the bountiful, replenishing, cosmic time of the gods. By connecting to this imprint of celestial creation, it was believed that the world and man himself was filled with the vital forces of creative energy needed for both regeneration and transformation, with which he could return to the ordinary or profane time to carry out his life's mission. Sacred space is therefore the important staging ground where we must all delve into periodically to go through a process of initiation, thus gaining anchorage and psychic security, so that we may be filled with a confidence to claim a sense of celestial guidance and be filled with a purpose that carves a new dimension of meaning to our lives. The great issue for us moderns is that we have forgotten the sacred. This should be worrying, since profane space differs from sacred space in that it has no fixed point or centre from which to gain orientation. Profane space has no axis mundi, no cosmic tree or pillar leading to the heavens. This is the experience of modernity, people unable to locate a centre. Profane space allows no direct contact with the power that enables renewal and regeneration to occur. Inability to locate a centre corresponds to an inability to find the source of power necessary for regeneration. Eliade continues, modern persons find this notion difficult to perceive because they have been so exiled from an authentically spiritual or religious understanding of human experience. Modern secularized individuals typically think that no true center really exists, and profane space becomes for them a formidable yet meaningless expanse that is fundamentally unreal. It becomes a creative void and the locus of deterioration. We have seemingly exiled ourselves from the well of renewal. Man's extremity is God's opportunity. Thus exiled, we find ourselves lost amongst the sands of time, drifting without direction, without a destination, without meaning. The dark night of the soul has begun. Yet we needn't fall into total despair. The night is darkest before the dawn, they say. Before the onset of new life, the old must be torn away. In order for us to blossom under our newfound inner light, we must disturb the soil to prepare the ground for the new seeds to bloom. Within the seeds of suffering, then, lies the flowering of our liberation, for it is with hardship that the opportunity for conscious advancement makes itself manifest. When we cannot change a situation, we are invited to change ourselves. The tension within our psyche is indicating to us that the time has come for our conscious evolution, that there must be a breakup in the psychological status quo in order to bring about a new stage of conscious development. This pursuit for meaning may arouse an inattention that causes an existential frustration, triggering the search for the will to meaning. Yet since this tension provides the stimulus needed to begin change, it has inherent utility. Frankl distinctly states, what man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. What he needs is not the discharge of tension at any cost, but the call of a potential meaning waiting to be fulfilled by him. An experience of deep alienation is therefore periodically needed in order to begin the work of deconstruction, so that we may return reconstituted anew. The classical symbol for alienation is the image of the wilderness. With a return to the primordial setting, we come into renewed contact with the natural instinctive life. Here in nature, we are set upon the stage from which we are given the symbols necessary to begin deconstructing and heal the scars formulating from our life journey. The very mountains are symbolic of an ancient ascent towards the heavens, the bodies of water symbolic of not only cleansing, but of a return into the formless primordial state. The soil, symbolic of burial and therefore of a resurrection and birth of a new conscious order, of a new axis mundi. Put simply, it is here where some manifestation of God is encountered, whereby the unconscious is brought into consciousness and the ego-self axis is repaired through a numinous encounter between ego and self in a process known as individuation. What is meant by these terms ego, self, and ego-self axis? Leading from Jungian psychology, the self can begin to be described through such themes as wholeness, totality, the union of opposites, the central generative point, the world navel, the axis of the universe, eternity as opposed to the temporal flux, the elixir of life, the very fountain of creation and our being that can most simply be described as God. I wish I could take credit for that description, but that was written by Edward Edinger in his Ego and Archetype. Phenomenal book and fantastic description. But getting back on track. The alchemical process stems from the ancient Greek tradition of Hermeticism, an eclectic blend of ancient Greek and Egyptian philosophies. Corresponding to the Hermetic saying of as above, so below, the relationship between man and the cosmos is akin to that of an image reflected in a body of water. Just as the lake harnesses the image and likeness of a great tree and sky reflecting into it, absorbing their properties, some may say, so too the human being retains within him the reflection and blueprint of the cosmos, his psychological mapping serving as a mirror of the divine emanation. If one is therefore to have contact with the gods, he must know and work upon his relationship with his inner self. The supreme task of the alchemists remains the transmutation or separation of matter, since it was believed that the hidden wisdom of God, Sophia, was imprisoned in matter, in the unconscious, unilluminated areas of the mind. It was believed that through the transmutational process of alchemy, this supreme value of the divine spark could be released from its bondage in base matter and thus be brought into consciousness. Enter the Philosopher's Stone. To the uninitiated, the tale of the Philosopher's Stone perhaps goes no further than serving as a vehicle through which the possessor can attain the greatest of desires, be it immortality or through the force of transmutation, command gold from mere base metals. To the alchemists of old, however, the Philosopher's Stone is a symbol of the centre and totality of the psyche, serving as a conduit for one to know God directly, releasing the divine spark from within its bondage in matter, allowing the initiate to sink into the sea of consciousness and experience union with the divine in an expression of non-duality, known as gnosis, fana, or samadhi in the various mystic traditions of the world. To work on one's prima materia ultimately means the conscious effort of one to transmute the lesser matter into pure matter, ultimately deconstruction and reconstruction, symbolically represented through the Philosopher's Stone, culminating in the attainment of actualized wisdom, whereby the initiate, having come to know his inner self, comes to know God. Through the advanced practice of alchemy, one is able to liberate the divine spirit, or pneuma, the God within man that remains trapped within matter, the psyche. Much more simply to grasp, the ego for Jung represents the central field of consciousness containing our conscious awareness of existence, as well as a continuing sense of personal identity made up of all our thoughts, emotions, and memories. In short, the ego is the seat of subjective identity, the self the seat of objective identity. The ego-self axis connects and serves as the path of communication between the conscious personality embodied by the ego and the archetypal psyche represented by the self. Along the journey of psychic development, the connection between ego and self, conscious and unconscious, is disrupted as the ego experiences its natural fall following a stage of inflation, represented in the Flight of Icarus myth. The ego, now alienated, must journey through the wilderness, find its connection to the self once more, before to return triumphant in grace. Since religions are repositories of transpersonal experience and archetypal images, religious ceremonies and traditions, guided by a religious elder, serve to provide the individual with the experience of being meaningfully related to these transpersonal categories. The old religious structures protect man from the dangers of venturing into the psychic depths. However, in doing so, they also prevent him from being baptized into the pool of experience, thus depriving him of potential development that such experiences promote. As long as a living religion can contain the self and mediate its dynamism for its members, there will be little need for the individual to have a personal encounter with the self. He will have no need to find his individual relation to the transpersonal dimensions. The task will be done for him by the church. One may be tempted here to do away with religious institutions altogether. However, this can in itself be problematic, for without a ceremonial structure by which the individual can be related to the transpersonal categories of psychic life, the ego becomes endangered of falling into either a paradigm of ego inflation or severe ego alienation, thinking of itself as either everything or nothing. Self-love may not be so vile a sin as self-neglecting, yet to be in the service of oneself as the supreme principle naturally lends itself to preventing the initiate from cultivating true freedom and power, as they fail to see a world worth living for beyond their own base desires. Desire naturally places one on a weaker footing on the path to peace, as a supreme value worth serving is placed outside of their control, essentially tying one's sense of happiness to an external rather than internal entity. The second great danger of engaging in life without a spiritual framework or nexus is that one may become enamored and manipulated by secular forces given the veneer of a deity through archetypal projection. For without an established framework to provide an alembic vessel from within which the initiate can experience a real metamorphosis, the archetypes, having no container, are projected out into the world onto secular matters, such as political ideologies, consumerism, or personal power. Personal, secular, or personal matters thus become charged with an unconscious religious meaning. The transpersonal value then becomes how high one's standard of living is, degree of personal power, or some socio-political reform movement. This should be particularly worrying since it becomes clear how manipulation and infatuation with illusory ideals can possess an individual to act out a psychologically religious motivation unconsciously, leading to fanaticism. This is what I personally believe to be the warning against idolatry, to not become enchanted into an unconscious slumber, worshipping the false idols of either your own desires, hence the Islamic idea of battling against the nafs, as well as the idols of the external world that seek to enslave the consciousness of man. In his The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell outlines the common thread sprawled throughout world mythologies pertaining to the growth of a character in a framework that he calls the hero's journey. The hero's journey is Campbell's label for the deep inner journey of transformation that heroes of all times and ages partake in, a path that leads them to separation, descent, ordeal, and finally, a return. The journey begins with a call, inviting the would-be initiate upon the path towards great change. The call is always a call to transformation, thus beginning the initiate's journey into sacred space. For Jungians, the call is administered through the ego-self axis. In his Ego and Archetype, Edinger explains how consciousness of this axis has an awakening, transforming effect on the personality. A new dimension of meaning is discovered which conveys value to subjectivity. The call expresses an experience of awakening which leads the individual out of his personal preoccupations into a more significant destiny. Mythologically, the call is administered through messengers as the likes of Hermes or Odin, functioning as bridges of communication between the world of the gods and the world of man. They are the link between the two worlds, between ego and self. At other times, the call can be perceived through the recognition of something symbolic, such as the spotting of a specific animal that the person attaches symbolic meaning to, heralding them into the path towards a greater destiny. To escape the bonds of chronic liminality and find our flame once more, we must be willing to plunge into the pool of psycho-spiritual transformation, into the realm of myth and magic, so that we may emerge from the chaos reborn into a being with firmer roots and greater psychic anchorage. To begin our journey into sacred space, all we must do is answer the call.